All right, so this webinar is about, it's titled How to Not Get Screwed by a Web Developer, but really what we're going to be talking about is the information about systems and options and common pitfalls that if you know that stuff ahead of time, you can use that information as you're deciding what to do with your website to make an informed and confident decision. So who this webinar is particularly trying to help are small business owners who have either maybe already been through a bad experience with a website project, or they know that they need to do work on their website and they want to make sure that they invest their time and money in the right system with the right person, just so that that ends up being valuable / they don't end up getting screwed. So the goal of this is to get you the information you did not know that you didn't know, so that when you do make a decision, you're confident in it. What we're going to cover today are the two elements of website projects. That includes a technological element and a human element. And we're going to go through things like system options, pros and cons of them, how to decide if you should build your website yourself or if you should probably hire help. And then we'll talk about all the different types of people you could hire, pros and cons of those, and evaluating options as well. We will show our process at the end as kind of a frame of reference, especially if you're considering hiring someone to work on your website. It's really nice to have sort of a baseline to compare things to as you go through discovery with other agencies or developers and options. The reason that this matters so much, and the reason that we at Hooked on Code are pretty passionate about helping people figure out what's right for them, even if that means not working with us, is because hiring the wrong type of help, developer, agency, or choosing the wrong system when building your website can essentially leave you with something that is inflexible and not usable. So jumping right in, there are two elements of any website project. As I mentioned, there is a technological element. We're going to talk about available content management systems, also known as CMSs, pros and cons of them. I will tell you what we use and why. And then I'll just mention recommended options, either if you're going to try to build your website yourself or if you plan on outsourcing or hiring help for that. The second element is the human element. And if you build your own website, technically you are the human element. If you decide to hire help, that could look like a developer, which have different formats, freelancers and stateside and overseas and where you find them, and then agencies, which also have different flavors, small agencies and large multidisciplinary agencies. And so we'll talk about those common issues as well. That's going to be a big focus. I'll go through 8 very, very, very common issues that we hear our clients that come to us that have already had past website experiences complain about the most. And then we'll actually, each of those 8 issues, we're actually going to give you like the questions that you could ask that will help you figure out if those are going to be a problem when considering working with someone. So I'm going to go into the technological elements and we're going to talk a little bit about systems. So the most common systems or platforms that are used to build websites are, there's a mixture of free and paid versions or options. You've probably heard of all these: WordPress, Drupal, Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, Shopify, Kajabi. Lots of them are even probably advertised to you on social media. I don't think I've watched a YouTube video in the last year that hasn't had an advertisement for Wix on it. So the difference between like these free platforms and the ones that are paid in general has to do with whether they are open source or closed source. And I realize that that's a technical term that you may or may not remember or care about, but the reason that it matters has to do with the flexibility of the platform and kind of the safeguards that are in place. I like to compare this to like buying a PC because you plan on like upgrading it and messing with it and taking it apart and putting it back together and making it whatever you want to make it, which would be a great example for open source. Versus closed source, which I would refer to kind of an example of like a Mac, where you can't open it and upgrade the RAM yourself. You can't upgrade the hard drive. You can't like change the graphics chip yourself. There are safeguards in place so that you cannot screw up that Mac, right? So open source versus closed source is kind of similar. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple slides when I explain what's better for like a do-it-yourself project versus hiring somebody and why people choose different things. The reason that it is important for us that people understand a little bit about these platforms and the pros and cons of them is because if you end up building your website or hiring someone to build your website on a system that is not appropriate for your content or your business or your stage or your budget, you could be left with something that is either inflexible and hard for you to change, or you may end up having to literally completely redo your website because you find that it's not usable. So this webinar is titled How to Not Get Screwed by a Web Developer, which means while I really want to help people decide whether a do-it-yourself project is appropriate for them, I am going to spend the majority of our time talking about the scenario of I want to hire a developer, but I don't want to get screwed. But just because it is important for us also to make sure that nobody spends money hiring someone to build something that they really have the capability to do themselves, I want to talk about what kind of person is very well suited to build their website themselves and then what we recommend. So you can see here that we think people that are relatively patient with others, but especially themselves, that's an important quality if you're thinking about building your own website. The second thing that I think is very, very important is if you are not a technologically savvy person, if you didn't grow up with computers, or you just kind of don't intuitively know what to do in some instances, or you're afraid to hit the delete button sometimes because you're like, what if I wipe my hard drive? Let's go ahead and assume that this would not be something you would either enjoy doing or be able to do efficiently, and I would opt out of that. I also recommend having at least a sense of design. If you consider yourself an artistic person or you have a design eye, that would be pretty important if you plan to build your website yourself. Also, a requirement I feel is important to think about is that that there's not a high pressure timeline or high stakes on the project itself. If there is, you are putting yourself under a whole lot of pressure for something that is not your expertise, and that's tough. But if what I've described here actually does kind of fit what kind of person you are, you may really enjoy building your own website. And there are lots of platforms to do this on. Back when we were looking at open source versus closed source and free versus paid, all of those paid versions, Wix, Weebly, Shopify, Squarespace, Kajabi, all of those are closed source, and they're limited in flexibility because there are safeguards in place to make sure that you end up with something that is beautiful and that you can't break. And so the platform is paid because they're targeting people that want to build their websites themselves. And it's kind of hard to mess them up, which I think is great. Squarespace is our favorite for that general recommendation. And then the kind of question to ask yourself if you're trying to decide, is it appropriate for me to hire help, would be if you are busy doing your job, thinking about one more thing stresses you out, you know that you need a functional website for your business, like you know that it's important and you're ready to invest in it, you just honest to God don't know who to trust or how to screen for the right kind of fit with a developer. We prefer WordPress for a platform here, and I will go into in the next couple slides why that is, because I think that that's also important to understand. So if you are considering building your website yourself, I recommend just taking a screenshot of this and referencing it when you start doing your research. This is not necessarily the topic of the webinar, but if it's an option and you're thinking about it, I would go ahead and save this for later. Basically, I just have a list of the options, what's better for a store or a course delivery platform, our general recommendation, and why this matters. All right, moving on to the non-DIY options. So the most popular systems for developers and agencies are these open source platforms. The platforms themselves are typically free, meaning the developers or agencies don't have to go pay a licensing fee for Drupal or WordPress. One note is I have Squarespace listed here. That is paid. It is closed source, but it's something that you could actually pay a freelancer to build you a website on. So it's worth mentioning, and that's typically a lower dollar option. You're just left with a rather inflexible, you can't do whatever you want in it, right? So we have those safeguards, you're in a box, but it's probably going to be pretty. So that's something worth noting. The thing about Drupal and WordPress, these open source platforms, are that they are relatively complex. There is a learning curve. That's why people have built their entire careers off of them, because the rest of the world that doesn't have experience in them can't like open them up and be like, I know what to do. Thanks for steps 1 through 10, WordPress. There is a learning curve here. There are skill sets and lots of things to consider when building sites on these open source platforms. Our recommended choices are WordPress. It looks like a couple words got deleted here. It's supposed to also say plus Divi theme. We'll talk about that next. And then also WP Engine hosting. That is our stack of choice. The reason that this matters is that if you pay somebody to build you a website, you're likely going to get what you wanted at the end of it. You're likely going to get launched with something that works for you. But at some point, you may notice that you're not able to make the amount of changes or add a feature that you wanted to, and you might end up rebuilding it. The reason that we choose WordPress is that it is by far the most popular content management system on the web. Over 30% of all websites in existence use that platform. That's insane. That is a huge, huge percentage. What comes with that popularity and the fact that it is open source is that there is a huge support base, meaning you have a question, something's not working, you can search for it on the Googles, and somebody else has had that problem and someone else has already answered it with a solution. This is very helpful for both people who already have a WordPress website and run into trouble, or for agencies like ours where we use WordPress and something that a client wants to do, we're like, is that possible? Can you do that? And we can search for it, and sure enough, hopefully one other person in the world has tried to do it and somebody's figured out a solution, and we can pass along that time savings and that cost savings to our clients by offering websites that cost a whole lot less to build than a completely custom developed website from scratch. The community aspect of WordPress is pretty dope too. As an agency, how that looks for us is we had a client one time ask us to add conditional checkout fields depending on what category of product someone bought. So if you bought category A, they have to ask you 4 more questions. Some of them are required, some weren't, than if you bought something in category B. And at that time, that function literally did not exist yet in a plugin. However, there were some paid licensed plugins that got really close. So we as an agency reached out to one of these development agencies and said, yo, have you ever thought about adding this feature, this like conditional checkout field feature based on category? They had conditional checkout fields, but not based on category. It was like if you said your first name is Frank, then it'd be like, what up, Frank? What's your last name? Conditional field, whatever. Horrible example. But they got back to us within a week and said, wow, there really isn't another plugin that does that. Yeah, we're going to add it. We'll send you an email when we push the release next week. And then sure enough, within a week, that feature that did not exist existed in this plugin. That is super cool. And the community of WordPress is unlike anything I've seen for another platform. That was also an example of this like low-cost plugin add-on functionality. If we had had to custom develop that feature for a client, we would have billed 20, 30, 40 development hours to build a custom plugin and have that feature. And that client didn't have to pay for that. They had to pay like a $60 a year licensing fee for this plugin that some other development company built. That's pretty cool. You can also customize pretty much everything with WordPress. That's that whole flexibility thing, but it's also a can of worms if you're going to develop your own website, which is why we actually don't recommend WordPress if you're going to do it yourself. The bottom line is WordPress is our platform of choice because it lets us say yes to almost everything, and it's usually very affordable as well when it comes to features. If you're thinking about hiring someone to build your website and you've just been convinced that WordPress rocks, there's 2 other things we need to talk about. One is themes and the other is hosting. They're both very, very, very important in terms of building a solid technological foundation for your website. Your theme is your site's lifeblood, right? But think about WordPress, the content management system, the platform, as you will, as the foundation of a house. And then the house itself. how it looks on the outside, your options for laying it out on the inside, all kind of have to do with what WordPress calls your theme. Now, explaining this in the past has proven a little bit confusing. So I am, after this, going to pause and check the chat and see if anything that I said did not make any damn sense, because this is what we get the most questions on when we teach this. So theme options are, there are things that are called like framework themes. A theme used to mean you'd go look for a theme that matched your industry, and you'd look for one that had a color scheme that you like, and you picked it, and it's like what your website looked like. That theme, it had predetermined layouts of pages, which pages you got, how your contact page looked, how your staff page was laid out, and how bios appeared, and the typography and the colors and all that. That's what themes just period used to be, all of them. That is this middle option right now, what we call non-builder themes. They're themes that are completely pre-built, that determine your layout and your styles and everything. What we use, and what is really cool and kind of new, sort of, I mean, they've been around for as long as Hooked on Code's been around, but what we would call framework themes. An example of this is Divi, which we use, and they don't make aesthetic decisions for the developer. So typography is not chosen, colors are not chosen, so the developer gets to choose all those things. It's just this really cool framework that allows you to easily build a website that can also then be easily manipulated, changed, layouts adjusted in the future. So a lot of flexibility here, very, very powerful and very popular. Actually, I think Divi is also currently the most popular WordPress theme. And then the last option that I want to mention really briefly is that many developers and agencies, particularly large agencies and overseas developers, have a preference towards building what are called custom themes. And this means that someone decides what the theme is going to look like, and then somebody else just goes and builds from scratch a WordPress theme that they can then plug into WordPress, but that is 100% just designed to match that layout that was, custom created or custom designed. There are limitations to this in almost an unspeakable way. And while this is appropriate for really large companies, it is almost all of the time an inappropriate choice for small businesses. Our recommended themes are these frameworks. There's more than one. Divi is what we use. There's another really great one called Elementor. And then there's a third one. This is the only time I will say this today. That's called Beaver Builder. But it's very popular and very powerful despite the name. Obviously, choosing the wrong theme, even if you've chosen the right framework, meaning WordPress, can absolutely make your site basically handcuffed. You may not be able to change around the layout. You may not be able to add a video a month down the line when you get a professional video recorded for your homepage. That may actually be hard if you have a custom built theme or if you have a pre-built non-builder theme. So that's why this is so important. And I know that Divi has a lifetime license, which is pretty cool. A lot of themes don't. You have to pay for them annually. So I think that's another upside for, another sales pitch. So we don't get paid by them, but another sales pitch for Divi that we just absolutely love about them. The last piece of your technological framework that is so important is your website's hosting. And it's not something that you would know is important until something goes wrong. And then you would realize oh shit, my hosting sucks. There are cheap commodity hosts. I'm going to give an example and say if you just pay for GoDaddy $70 a year shared server hosting, you can absolutely have a WordPress website on that. It will load, right? It'll kind of work. But there will be certain things that you try to do that feel very normal that all of a sudden you run into a problem with. And you're going to be wondering why there's a problem. And you won't quite know why you can't update that plugin or install Yoast SEO Premium. And you may get stuck on the phone with support for 4 hours while you're trying to figure it out, only to figure out that it's server limitations. The server is configured improperly for having the theme and the plugins that you have, and that your website needs more memory allocated or whatever. If you have quality hosting such as WP Engine, which is who we use, Flywheel, also a great one, Pressable, kind of new to us, but also looks pretty great. These are managed WordPress hosting platforms. And instead of, you know, the alternative to that $5 a month cheap hosting that like you lose years of your life over in stress, these are really high quality, very fast, very secure, like anal retentive secure hosts that are configured only for WordPress websites, which means they're going to be as fast as possible, as efficient as possible, as secure as possible, because they're not trying to deal with email and static HTML sites and Drupal sites and this and that. That also come with incredible features like nightly automatic backups and 24/7 hosting, so that if there is a problem with your website, you can get support within minutes, or you could even bring up your website yourself with a simple like 2-click step process in minutes. So this is very, 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 very important, and something that even though like in a discovery call, nobody ever comes to us and is like, who do you use for hosting? Because they don't know how much it matters. So we tell them who we use, why it matters, so that when they go interview somebody else or go through a discovery process with a different developer agency, they know to ask that question because they realize, oh, this is actually important. That wraps up the human element, and I'm going to take just a quick pause. I'm going to open the chat and see if anybody has, one, any questions, or two, if they kind of, if anything that I just described and all those technological pieces just was not articulated very well and you have a follow-up question. Also a moment to breathe, because this is a lot of information. Does everybody breathe? Okay, moving on. So the human element of design is what determines the experience of the project. So while the technological elements are crucial to determining, is your site going to work well? Is it going to be secure? Is it going to be fast? Is it going to be flexible? Will you be able to add stuff or change stuff later? The human element of design is what determines how that project is going to feel when you're in it. If you are building your own website, that depends on you. And I say free because you're not paying somebody, but just a note before I move on, most of the people that we talk to who have built their own website report spending between 50 and 100 hours and it taking about a month in the best case scenario. I've also heard 3 to 6 months. So while I mention free-ish because there's not an invoice you're paying somebody, I would like to remind you as also a small business owner that your time is very valuable. Let's say you bill $150 an hour because you are a seasoned professional in what you do and you're great at it, and you spend 100 hours learning how to and actually building your own website. It's $15,000 of forfeited income. So I say free-ish. Obviously, it's not free, but we're going to move on to things that you'd actually have to pay other people for. So freelance developer overseas and statewide, there is a difference here. I am not America-centric. I am only trying to point out the difference in typical experiences and approaches between these two options. A freelance developer overseas, which you might find on like a Fiverr.com or an Upwork.com, I would say that those are great resources if you need a logo file adjusted and you don't have the original logo file, or you need a book cover design for an ebook or even a real book, whatever. But when it comes to building a website, and if you're looking at that option, you might notice that you could pay somebody to build you a website for $500,000 maybe. And the experience that you get there is one that puts most of the ownership of the project on you. So that's a great choice if you operate well as a content writer, strategist, project manager, and you are down to take the cost benefit or cost savings of that and invest a huge amount of your time managing the project. I have yet to actually meet someone who has done that and it has felt worth it or enjoyable. Most of the time when someone has done that, they come to us and say, it was painful. I like cried trying to get it to keep happening. We couldn't connect in real time because there was a 12-hour time difference. And then they prefer to build custom themes. So you're left with something that you actually cannot really edit at the end. So I'm not saying I don't recommend it, but there are some pretty big drawbacks to the cost savings here. So it's just something to consider if that's in your consideration set. Hiring a freelance developer stateside will be quite a bit more expensive, hourly or in flat rate. but you are more likely going to be able to get to, connect with them on a Zoom, be eye to eye, save some back and forth time. You still will have to act as the project manager most of the time here, because you are asking a freelance developer / designer to build the thing, but there's not like a separate project manager that's going to keep them on track. So that needs to be an understanding that while there's still a cost savings here versus hiring an agency of any form, you are still going to have that onus on yourself to drive the project forward. The next level is an example of us. So we're a small specialized agency, meaning all that we do is build WordPress websites. We are a small, efficient team. We do design and development in the same phase versus breaking it out into 2 phases, which saves us time, which then means that we can charge less than, a big agency that has a separate designer, separate developer, all that. So a small specialized agency like ours is going to be a little bit more than hiring a freelance developer, obviously, and quite a bit less than hiring a large multidisciplinary agency that, say, offers SEO services and digital marketing and paid ad services and print design services and collateral, all that. So those large multidisciplinary agencies are quite a bit more expensive. And interestingly enough, they also typically prefer to build custom themes as well. Just like the kind of overseas freelance developer option I mentioned, the experience is quite wonderful. You have a project manager, typically they stay on a timeline of some reasonable sort, but you are probably going to end up with a custom built theme, which they're going to pitch as something that's really great. But we haven't seen that work very well for small businesses, like ever, because most small businesses want a level of control and flexibility in their website so that it doesn't have to just be blown up and redone, or, so they can manage it themselves if they want. All right, I know that was a lot of options and a lot of information. Obviously, you understand that the reason that this matters is because if you hire someone for, like, let's say a cost savings reason and you don't understand the drawbacks, you could be left with a product that isn't going to be sufficient for what you need. Also, if you have all the pressure on you as the project manager, if that's truly your job, and that's one of the ways that you make that cost savings is you take that responsibility, often involuntarily, then it will be a painful process. It's not going to be easy because you're basically still having to do everything except put your hands to the keyboards and make it happen. I have this in its own slide because it's really important for me to reiterate that if you don't know the experience you are buying for a $500 website, it is quite tempting to consider it as a good option. I'm not saying it is not a good option for you. I'm just saying you need to understand the experience that you are buying and decide if you can literally handle it. I would die. My head would explode if I had to manage one of these projects. I'm going to pause again, take a breath, and ask if anybody has actually had an experience they want to share, whether it comes to any type of web project in any of those spheres, or if any questions have come up so far before I move on to the call this the meat, these kind of separate broken out common issues and questions we think you can ask to counteract them. Any questions? Okay, moving on. So red flag number 1 that we want to talk about is if there is no real process described for a project. So we're going into these red flags assuming that you are intending on going through a discovery process of some sort or interviewing at least one developer or agency to do some work for you on your website. So if you're talking to somebody and there's no real project or process, what this could look like is that developer ending up working on their time, when they want to, when they can. And the drawback of that is usually it ends up in them not meeting the deadlines that they set. Also, often deadlines aren't actually hard set. They're kind of like fuzzy stated, like, oh yeah, that'll take about 2 weeks. It probably will take more because it's not a hard deadline and there's not much at stake for them. You will be the person in this instance holding the developer to their promises and not the other way around. Some questions to ask if that sounds crappy to you are, how long will my website take to be built, meaning is there a set launch date? When will it launch? And what do I receive back if you don't meet your promised deadlines? Red flag number 2 is that you're getting a custom theme unique to you pitched. We've already talked about this. Again, the reason that this can hurt you is that while they are truly unique, and that sounds pretty cool in theory, they're also completely inflexible. So while you might be able to change, let's say, some text that appears in a certain spot on your page, because there's going to be a box in the back end that says, here's where that text goes, you wouldn't be able to change, let's say, the color of the text or the image that's in the background maybe, or make it not quite as wide so it takes up less space on a desktop. None of that is flexible. So if you decide that you wanted to change the layout of a page, move things around, add a video, let's say, like I gave the example, it's really not going to be that easy. If this doesn't sound good to you, some questions to ask would be, what theme do you use to build websites? If they have an answer and they say, oh, we use this theme and then we build a child theme on it, that's telling you they're not building a custom theme. You could also ask just directly how much of what you build is custom. It's almost like a trick question because it kind of sounds like you want it to be custom, like you think that's a good thing. But the answer, all of it, would be concerning because that means you're not going to have much flexibility in your platform moving forward. Red flag number 3 would be is if there's no form of a satisfaction guarantee or a happiness policy or anything like that. It would be unusual to find a freelance developer that has one of these. So if you plan on going that route, there's possibly a way that even though they don't have one, you could make it clear to them that that would benefit you and you would like that. So the reason that this is so important is because it is horrifyingly common for developers to either miss deadlines or literally disappear. It's called ghosting. I mean, that's what it's called, like, in any industry everywhere. But, like, in the web industry, this is, like, such a thing. We have a URL that is yourdevghosted.wtf. It's just, like, so common, and we don't ghost. So if you don't have something that protects you against that common risk, you could totally lose your entire investment. And we have plenty of clients that come to us saying, we've been trying to work with this agency for 10 months. We have nothing. We need to start over, and they lose their money. So questions to ask if that sounds awful are, I know it is common that this happens, that deadlines can be missed, that people can disappear. This matters to me. This is a big investment for me. What systems or guarantees do you have in place that could prevent that from happening to me or could help me if that ends up happening? If they get defensive, I would immediately thank them for their time and I would just move on and interview somebody else. We have a 100% happiness guarantee. That's something that, again, I don't think most freelancers have. I would hope that larger agencies would have this, but that would be, if they just come out and say, oh yeah, we just want to make sure that you're happy with what you got, that's a good sign. For reference, what ours is like, if you engage with us in a project and we get to the end of that project and we've gone through reviews, we've asked you if you like it or not, and you've worked with us and given us feedback, and we end up delivering you a thing, and you're like, I'm just not happy. It's not what I wanted, and I'm not happy. That's not what we want either. And you could literally return, we wouldn't launch it, we would return your website or your product, whatever we made you, and we would just give you your money back. Side note is that this has never had to happen because we obviously care very, very much about our clients getting what they paid us for. But we notice that this is very helpful when small business owners are deciding, like, oh my God, should I really invest money in letting somebody else do this for me? This feels risky. This takes away a lot of that feeling of risk. Red flag number 4 is that you are 100% responsible for providing the content for your website up front. This does not sound like a bad thing, right? It actually sounds totally logical. Like, it's your business. You're the person that knows the content. You're the person that knows what you like, and you're probably the person that has the images. The reason that this matters, even though it kind of sounds like a logical thing, is that the majority of developers and even agencies, they push the responsibility of site content onto the client in a way that allows them to step away from accountability if the client can't deliver on that. So let me rephrase that. Let's say the development agency says, hey, we need all content from you. Anything that needs to go on the site, we need it. Here's these 10 things we need it by this date. And let's say that date comes around and 2 of those items the client has not been able to find or get to you for whatever reason. They're busy. Most developers and agencies would use that as a very logical opportunity to stop working and work on the other stuff that's on their plate. And then the reasoning feels legitimate, right? They can say to the client, well, we're gonna, as soon as you get that to us, we'll get this picked back up. The deal is that while it sounds actually kind of logical, it's really not necessary in a lot of instances. So if it were time to launch your website and you haven't given me access to your DNS records, which is what I would need to actually turn on your site and tell it to go look at the new server, yeah, I can't launch your site. Sure, there are some instances where if I need something from you and you haven't gotten it to me, that causes a problem and I truly must pause. But most of the time, it's not necessary to pause. Most of the time, if you're a professional and you're willing to collaborate and meet your client where they're at, you can help them write content, gather content, things like that. So a question to ask, if it sounds like, you don't want to be the bottleneck and you're terrified of that, you could ask, first of all, be prepared. What do you need from me and when? And then you can try your best to deliver that. The other questions you could ask, though, are if I don't get you something when you need it, how do you keep the project moving? What do you do to help me gather content? For example, if we have a small business owner that goes, I'm so ready to work on my site, I just have not had the damn time to sit down and write the content. We go, it's okay. We can set a slightly longer than normal kickoff meeting. Let's block an hour and 15 minutes or something. Find a day when you're really going to be, on it. And we're going to ask you questions about your own business. Guess what? You don't have to think about the answers. You know the answers. It's your business. You don't have to think about it. So we have somebody basically dictating that stuff and turning that into copy that then you get to review and you get to say, that's accurate or that's not accurate. But all the pressure for generating your content doesn't actually have to be on you, even though it's an industry standard that it is. Red flag number 5 is if the developer won't teach you how to edit stuff yourself on your own website. This is also very common. Many developers build websites on WordPress, which is supposed to be flexible and user-friendly, in a way that chips away at the flexibility of the platform. They either build a completely custom theme or they do something that you've asked them to do by writing one line of code and putting it in a custom plugin when there was already a well-supported, very popular plugin that did the same thing. Those are lazy development choices. So that's one reason that a developer may not be willing to train you on how to do something, because it's not trainable. They're like, do you know PHP? So it's either, if they can't train you on how to make your own edits, it's either because they have intentionally or unintentionally locked down your site, or it's too complex. If that doesn't sound great and you want some flexibility, you could ask something like, how much of my website can I edit when it's done? Could I easily, let's say, add a video in the future? Can you train me on how to do that? Red flag number 6 is there's no real ongoing support of any kind. We only have 2 more of these after this. There's no real ongoing support of any kind. This might not sound like a bad thing if you're thinking, I just need my website built and then I'm going to maintain it myself. But I just wanted to mention that even if your website is perfect when it's launched, and flexible, and built with smart, user-friendly tools, you will likely at some point need to add something, a feature, a new page, and you're not comfortable doing it, that you just need help with. You just want help with, or you're so busy raking in the cash that you can afford to pay somebody to do that stuff because you know that your time is valuable. You're going to be billed for that, right? There's going to be some form of a cost associated with that request. Or you realize that if your website doesn't stay up to date technically, which is a fact, it's not a suggestion, WordPress core, your themes, and your plugins all need to be updated because the web is changing and there are releases that need to be, there are updates that need to be made to each of those that coincide with releases in them that match kind of what's going on in the web, security risks and improvements and feature releases and all that stuff. And if those pieces of your website are not actually kept up to date, or not, that you don't update them monthly or someone doesn't update them monthly, you absolutely can have a security risk. Your website can totally crash, or pieces of it could just stop working because they're not compatible with other pieces. So questions to ask, because this is something we believe is very important. If you're going to make an investment in your website, it would kind of be nice if you knew what ongoing support could look like. You could ask, do you offer ongoing support and what does it look like? How's it structured? Or if I need something updated in the future, how will that work? How will it be billed? What can I expect? Red flag number 7 is you just don't know what this project is going to cost. To me, personally, that would be a problem. Like as someone who owns a business and would be deciding to invest in something, I kind of need to know what something's going to cost before I sign a contract so that I can make sure that I have the budget for it. If a developer or agency provides an estimate, but not a firm actual contracted flat rate cost, that means they're in essence billing you hourly. They're still trying to give you a range, like an expectation range, which is great, but it doesn't have to fall within that range, right? If it takes more time than the range, you're going to get billed for that time. If they're professional, they would probably give you a heads up and say, hey, we gave you this estimate range. We're going over because of X, Y, and Z reason. When a developer or an agency is billing hourly, and that's part of their allowed business practice, they don't shy away from opportunities to do things that weren't in the original scope, because it's logical for them to come back and say, you know what, that we didn't know you wanted to do that back when we gave you that estimate, so it'll be additional money, but yeah, we can do it. And because it's just not in this flat rate fee, it's just likely that you're going to end up with an additional invoice or paying more than you had expected, and it'll go over budget. So if that's not your jam, you could say, I prefer flat rate pricing so I can budget accordingly. How can we set this up so that there is a clear scope that I'm agreeing to as well, and that the project can have a flat fee? If anything comes up that's outside that scope, will you let me know that it's going to cost me more money so I can decide if I want to do it? The last one I want to detail is not just a red flag, it's a deal breaker. And that is that you end up not actually owning your own website. And we see this all the time. The way that this can hurt you is kind of obvious. If a developer purchases, let's say, your domain name, or has your website on their server but does not give you access to it, or purchases licenses on behalf of you, but they don't provide logins to those to manage them, that means that even if they say, absolutely, you own your website, 100%, we built it, you paid for it, it's yours. If it's on their server that you don't have access to, or if your domain name is under an account that they own, it means you actually don't have control of it. You don't own it. Obviously, this is hugely problematic if you ever need to shift away from them. And we have heard a lot of clients that have a good experience with a web development agency, and then they explain how it shifted over time. You know, they were great when they built our website, but over time, as they got busier, X, Y, and Z happened, and we stopped getting the attention we needed, and we really need more attention than that, and we need to shift it to another agency. And then they realize that they can't. They're kind of locked down. So it is absolutely possible that you could lose your domain name, lose your site, have to start from scratch in this instance. So if that sounds like it sucks, you ask questions like, what's your policy on purchases made on behalf of clients? Could I purchase stuff myself, domains and licenses? And then will you provide me a login to anything that has to do with my website? If my website is going to be hosted on your server, which is not necessarily a red flag, that's what we do, but will you give me a login so that I can manage that, access my site files, etc.? And also, ideally, a piece of ownership would be some sort of training as well. Because even if you have all those logins, but you don't know what to do, if you want to change something on your website, it feels like it's not in your control, even if you technically could log in and do that. And so we think that training is a nice piece of business too, as well. This is a summary of what we just went over in case you wanted just one slide to screenshot, and our ideas on potentially, avoiding these kind of common pitfalls. So I'm going to take another breath, give you the opportunity for a screenshot if you want it, and then we'll keep going. Just quickly put in the chat if you have, if there are any kind of common issues that you feel like we missed that you have experienced. And I'll keep an eye out for that as we keep going. Okay, so as promised at the beginning, we are going to talk about our process here as a reference point. It is really, really nice to know how a project could go, so that if you're looking into other options, you have some sort of frame of reference for that. So working with Hooked on Code, we usually start with a discovery call. That's typically normal. That's kind of something you should expect with a developer or freelancer or an agency. Some sort of a discovery call where we learn what it is that you need and if we can do it. Step 2 would just be setting a scope of work. We do set scopes. So we do, we decide what you want to do. We talk about it. We make sure that it's correct. We set a flat rate price for that scope. that we agree on, and then, that's a signed contract. So if there's something else that you need that's outside of that, it's like a change order or a separate thing, so that we respect that scope of work and you know what things are going to cost. And then we sign contracts. Along with that step with us, we offer like payment plan options and an upfront payment discount and things like that. So all that is determined in the contract. And the other thing that's determined in our contract, which is a little unique, is we like to set very clear expectations for ourselves to keep ourselves accountable, and for our clients so they know what to expect in terms of timeline. So we actually get on the phone with our clients, and we schedule like the kickoff call, any review meetings that need to happen, and the launch and training meeting. We actually schedule them at the beginning of the project. And we both do our best to keep those meetings in place so that the project can stay on track for that set launch date. So all that goes into our contracts. The third step is obviously project build out. We do the work. Something to mention here that is kind of nice to know that is possible, although very, 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 very few people do it, are that our review meetings are in the form of a interactive workshop. So it would look like us being on a screen share together, us presenting the pieces of your website that were ready for review, but actually going through them together, not just explaining why things are a certain way and what our expertise drove us to choose in that instance, but also say, is there anything you don't like? Is the color right? Is that what you were looking for? Is there too much blue? Do these sections need to be reordered? Is there a copy edit that you want to just go ahead and make together so we get it right? We get as much done together in a review meeting as possible, that then avoids that kind of annoying feedback back and forth loop that can happen and things can get lost in translation. The normal feedback process for having something sent to you for review would look like, we do some work, we send it to you, we say, hey, will you let us know what you think? And then it's kind of up to you. Do you send us your thoughts in a video or a Google Doc, or do you type them all out in an email? And then we would have to spend time reading that and making sure that we get what you mean, and then making those changes, and then we'd send it back to you. And it's totally possible that we could have misunderstood something. So it's very, very efficient that we do it this way, and that results in some pretty significant cost savings to what we do versus what the larger agencies do with that shitty back and forth hell loop. Moving on, step 4 would look like a set launch date. So we would launch the website, and then usually the next day we have about 1 hour training session that is recorded. So that's again a screen share, but it is recorded. We provide that training video to our clients. So if they have somebody on their staff that can do most of the edits they want to make, they've got this really handy kind of training video that they can refer to. And then a very crucial part of our process is that we make sure that we have some sort of ongoing support, understanding agreement, something, so there's good expectations about, if you need help with something, here's what that looks like. Here's how to send in the request. Here's what it will cost, that sort of thing. So something that I wanted to mention is if you happen to be talking to an agency, it wouldn't be normal to expect this from a freelance developer, but if you happen to be talking to an agency, it would be worth asking if they have core values, only because then you can compare those against like what you're expecting and how you work. So for example, our core values are simplicity, which means the most important thing to us and how we work is, are we being, clear and direct in communication? When we made a development choice, was it the most simple choice? Even if it took us longer to figure out, was it the most simple choice? So that moving forward, it is obvious what was done. It is easy to change, easy to understand, things like that. Kindness, we don't work with assholes, and we very much try to, surround everything that we do and every client interaction with kindness. Our third core value is relentless forward motion. That has to do with that piece of like, oh, you didn't get me what you said you were going to get me. Instead of us saying, we'll wait, we just won't work on your site anymore, we'll wait. No, we have deadlines. We promised you review meetings. We promised you a launch date. We're going to figure out how to not need that piece for launch. And if you care about it, then you can get it to us, or we'll show you what we chose for that image from a really cool stock photography site or something in a review. And then we can go, if this works for launch, we'll leave it. If you want to send us something else, go for it. But we make sure that we, like a freight train, steadily move forward and meet our promises. It also has to do with our professional development policies and stuff like that. Our fourth core value is excitement. We want to make sure that we work with people who are just really good and just love what they do. And we're really good at what we do and love it. And when you get that kind of excitement together, it's really magical and it's really fun. And then our fifth core value is delightful.ai. And it's what we promise to be in client interactions. If we get through a client review meeting and we have not made our client laugh, we are failing at this core value. So it's very important to us that the experience, right, that human element that is such a shit show in most web development projects, and it is so important for us that clients actually enjoyed the process of building their website with us. I want to say thank you, and I also want to please invite you to send any additional questions or suggestions on this webinar, things that you feel like I didn't get covered or that you still feel a little fuzzy on, to Tori@hookedoncode.com. That is my direct email, or you can visit us online at delightful.af.